Hey, everybody. So if you have been hanging out with us for the last couple seasons of the podcast, you probably remember us mentioning Flaututi in our past episodes. Our friend Molly Sharp, who incidentally was also a guest in season 1, started Flaututi to share her awesome duet arrangements of standard viola rep, which are great for teaching, and it has now grown into a wide-ranging catalog of one-of-a-kind resources for violists and beyond. Steph, do you remember when we played one of the duets from a holiday bundle together?
Yes, it's one of my most cherished holiday memories.
Aww.
But actually, one of my favorites is something that all string instrumentalists would love. It's called Making Double Stops Ring, a guided exploration of just intonation. And Molly actually shared the viola version with us last year, and I am not exaggerating when I say that it completely changed the way I think about intonation. No one has ever explained it to me like this before. I think that we all realize on some level that a B in all situations is not the same, but why?
Yeah. Have you ever had that classic argument in a string quartet setting when you're trying to tune a chord and maybe we're playing that B and we're being told, no, it needs to go lower. No, it needs to go higher. It needs to go here. Wouldn't it be amazing to save all those hours for our string quartet students with no debate? We just know where it's supposed to go. Everyone agrees because there's only one way.
Right. You can just gift them copies of this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing personal. Just here's a book about intonation. Well, Molly has made it easy for all of us to play in tune. So whether you play viola, violin, cello, or bass, there's a version for you. You can find this pragmatic book, viola duet arrangements of classic viola repertoire, and so much more at VLATUTTI.com under Marketplace, or look in this episode's show notes.
Okay, so speaking of ridiculous things to talk to you about. So I'm watching the video and I'm realizing when you look in the mirror, it's backwards from what everybody else sees.
Yes, this is hurting my brain just thinking about this, but I will go through this exercise with you. Okay. Yes.
If I look at the video that was recorded, my face is the opposite way of what I expect it to be.
It's so trippy, right? You're like, what is reality anymore? I don't even know.
And I also don't understand. So how is that how it's supposed to be? Or did I screw it up and was I supposed to look at it, set the camera the other way?
No, I don't know.
So right now, if you're looking at yourself, which side is your part on?
Like as if I was looking in a mirror. It's on, oh God, I can't, I think you're going to witness steam coming out of my ears right now.
I'm freaking out right now. I feel like this side of my face was on this side when I looked at the video.
We're the head exploding emoji right now. Welcome to the Violacentric podcast. We are two curious violists exploring the art of connection through conversations with each other and our friends. I'm Stephanie Knutson.
And I'm Liz O'Hara Starr, and we're both professional freelance musicians living in the DC metro area. Gotta get used to taking video of myself.
Yeah, isn't that the worst?
It's one thing to get used to our voices. Now we're gonna have to get used to our faces.
Mm-hmm. Watching the weird tics that we do.
Despite the fact that I technically am a millennial, the term content creation, there's something about it that just...
All of this takes a lot of getting used to.
Yes.
Like having a social presence after... Listen, I didn't even get a cell phone until I was married. Aaron and I were always, for a long time, we were like, we don't need stupid cell phones. I don't want people to be able to reach me all the time and blah, blah, blah. And how far we've come or fallen, however you want to think about it. Doing what we do, we have to have a social presence, right? Mm-hmm. So that just takes some getting used to, thinking in that way. And I was so averse to it when it first started that it feels a little painful and awkward.
Yeah. It makes me go back to the idea of intention. You know, what's the intention behind sharing? We both have a really great concrete example of something that I think the intention is we love the project and we want to promote it, which is well, us, but I was thinking about American Pop's Orchestra. This is an organization that both of us just have so much fun working for. The productions are so great and they're entertaining and people just enjoy it so much that it's authentic. It's not coming from a place of like, look at what I'm doing. It's coming from a place of, you guys should check this out. It's really fun, you know?
Yeah.
You also can't make people understand your intentions, you know?
Mm-hmm.
For as many people go, oh, that's a really cool gig, somebody's going to go, oh, thanks for bragging about that, you know?
Right. And it all just comes down to, you just got to do you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel good, you know that what your intentions are. You just don't care what other people think,
Mm-hmm.
because you can expend a lot of energy trying to censor yourself.
Yeah. And I think this is actually kind of a nice little prelude conversation about social media engagement before our next episode, when we'll talk about our movie club project.
Right.
Our watching of Social Dilemma.
This is perfect.
Yeah, so FYI listeners, next episode we're going to have watched the movie The Social Dilemma. Please feel free to watch along with us, and we're going to talk about it, talk about our experience in watching it, and then obviously would love to hear your perspectives on that as well, either before or after the episode. If you watch it before the episode and you have a thought that you want to share about your experience in watching the movie, please email us. Our email address is violacentric@gmail.com. I know we've told you that before, but it's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we can have a conversation with all of you about it.
Yeah. But having the skills for self-promotion is something that we can all use these days, because we're having to promote ourselves in different ways. You and I used to rely on the networks that we had built and our reputations in those networks.
Mm-hmm.
And now, who knows what the future of those networks is?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel pretty confident that our reputations are still solid.
Yeah, me too.
But you just can't count on that anymore. So you have to be an expert at promoting yourself and putting yourself out there. And I think that a lot of us don't really have that skill set developed in the way that we have our playing skill set developed.
Yeah, Violacentric, it's so much fun. Just to circle back to this idea of starting the conversation with content creation and how we both went, content creation, right? And even just throughout this whole pandemic, like when I was doing stuff for Bar 3, I may or may not audition to be an instructor on Bar 3. I'm not going to hold myself to that publicly.
You heard it here.
I'm going to say it on the podcast and then I'll have to do it.
Put it in the universe.
It's out there. Officially, I've announced my intention. Anyway, I would record these videos, or I'd share a story about a workout at Audi Field or something over the summer. And my husband, Matt, would jokingly be like, oh, you're a content creator now. And I'd be like, stop that. That is so insulting. Why are you calling me a content creator? And now I'm thinking, well, for Violacentric, the whole goal here is to create content to share.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually what we're doing. And it's so much fun that I don't even care that that's the goal right now.
Because it doesn't feel contrived.
No.
It just feels like, we're just documenting conversations that we're having.
Yeah. And we're excited to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Maybe I should just be less judgmental of influencers. Maybe that is their jam and they're just documenting it.
Yeah.
Okay, we take it all back.
Good job.
You've convinced us. I love that we're getting better every time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can continue to make tiny improvements, that's perfection.
Yeah.
Perfect is not existent.
Mm-mm.
Better is perfect.
I'm just never done with school. And it's funny for me to say that because actually, I hated going to school. I hated getting grades. I hated having to write papers. The structure of school was very, very difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
But just like Robin said, I never want to stop learning. I'm never done.
Mm-mm.
I want to be a novice at something forever.
Yes. I love that idea. Always a student.
Yes.
There's always going to be somebody who knows more than you do.
Mm-hmm. Gary Zukav, who wrote Seat of the Soul. It's a very spiritually driven, kind of whole philosophy on why we live the way we live, what our souls are, and it's really interesting. He calls our experience here alive the Earth School, and that our experiences are teaching us lessons, and that really resonates with me because it means that every moment that we're alive, we're presented, and we're not going to do it 100% of the time, but every moment we're alive, we're presented with an opportunity to evolve in some way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think of it like a crescendo, how you get louder and louder and louder and louder. And the only way to continue crescendo is to keep getting louder. But when you get to the top, if you are not crescendoing, you are diminuendoing.
Yeah.
There's no maintaining at that high level. There always has to be growth
Yeah.
to be progressing. So if you're not crescendoing, you're diminuendoing, which is a kind of a metaphor for what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Is just like continue to improve ourselves in these little ways. I'm not saying like huge growth or huge new skill, but just a tiny little improvement, a tiny little growth in volume will keep a crescendo going.
Oh, I love that, Stephanie. That's so good. That's so good. We know as you crescendo, obviously you build towards a peak, right? Like there's a climactic moment at the end of a crescendo as that diminuendo happens. And so if someone is even thinking about it like, okay, well, I just keep growing and growing and growing, I don't know where that peak is. Is the peak the end of your life? Is the peak where you reach a moment and you're like, I think I'm good now with a diminuendo.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for everybody, which is so interesting. I just love that image so much. It's great. Boy, as freelance entertainers, our such a huge part of our world is still missing.
Mm.
But there's still so much more to experience and to learn. And that creative brain, it's always with us. Our creativity is always with us.
Mm-hmm. But just think when we come out of this, we're going to have this whole nother skill set.
Yeah.
I really think that once things open up and things get back to, I'm putting quotes up here, normal, that there is going to be a big bump in innovation and growth. And who knows what happens to our performing opportunities. Everything is just going to go up to another level because everyone's going to be, you and I, the people who we're interacting with, who are making things happen during the pandemic, we're going to have this skill set. We're going to be like X-Men, like superhumans. Because we're going to have the skills that we came into this with, but we're going to have these extra skills.
Yes. I've been full body nodding this entire time, everybody, just so you know. You're so right. And I love that idea of being the X-women.
Yes. X-women. Bionic women.
Bionic women. I totally agree. And I hope that innovation is part of our industry when we come back. It needs to be. I have always held this perspective that as a freelance musician, especially as a freelance classical musician, the truth is we are all running our own small businesses, but the product is us. So we're all entrepreneurs in some way. And it's really important to approach our careers that way. And when we don't, that's when you have a fantastic musician saying, I don't understand why I'm not getting work. I don't understand why I'm not getting calls. It has nothing to do with the skill level of that musician. Now, you have to be able to back up your abilities, right? You have to be ready to work within whatever the vibe is of a group that you're performing with, because we know as freelancers, it's different everywhere. Every viola section is different, has a different leader, has a different style. And so we have to have that flexibility and blend that we talk a lot about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have to be kind of a chameleon.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's definitely a good topic of discussion for the future.
Totally. I could go on forever about that. How do you start recruiting to build a studio? What are the materials you need? How do you write cold call emails to try and pursue opportunities? What does your resume look like? There's just so many things that we don't cover because the training is get really, really, really amazingly good at your instrument to the point where you might be able to win auditions. And then here's a diploma, slap you on the bottom and say, you're ready. Go out in the world and be a musician. That's all we get.
Yeah, it's really minimal. And you're just left to kind of fend for yourself.
Yes.
But two people who did that really, really well are our guests who we're going to hear from in a little bit.
Yep.
Scott Slapin and his partner, Tanya Solomon, the Slapin-Solomon Duo.
Mm-hmm.
And they performed together. They're both violists. Scott Slapin is a prolific composer for viola and viola ensemble. And his partner, Tanya, also does some composing. And they both perform together. They have so many recordings and they have so many offerings under their publication label, which is also called Violacentric. And we're excited to talk to them about their careers and how they've come to where they are now.
Yeah, the reason we came up with our name Violacentric is that viola is at the center of us as human beings. You know, it's just in the middle of our careers, our lives, and so many defines our personalities.
Right.
And for Scott and Tanya, they've created this whole fascinating operatic Wagner-esque story called Violacentrism. And Violacentrics are the followers of Violacentrism, which we will get into with them. So it's going to be a very viola heavy episode.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You come to the right place.
Yes. They were so gracious. We reached out to them. We said we'd be really interested in checking out their music, and they offered for us to get on Zoom and have a happy hour with them. So that's what we did, and we just had so much fun. Really so much fun talking to them.
They're just delightful.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like we'd known them forever.
Yeah.
And I feel that way often with violists.
Yes.
I mean, we're all
kindred spirits.
Yeah, we're all kind of kindred spirits, and we have the same kind of attitude and easygoing air about us. And they definitely had that. I mean, we had a beer and we talked about all things viola, and it was just such a fun time that we knew that we wanted to have them on for a deeper conversation. So we hope that you enjoy this exploration of Scott and Tanya's careers and their points of view.
Yeah, we hope you enjoy it.
So you think it's okay to be friends with brass players?
Yeah, this is sort of a running joke with my best friends in the music business, is that they're either violists or French horn players.
Trombone players too. I feel like we have a very similar like goofiness.
Yeah, that's true.
And laid back quality.
Mm-hmm.
Or low brass.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. These are the two sections that we always end up sitting in front of.
Well, you have to be friends with them.
Trombone players, the French horn players are the ones making us deaf. At least the French horn players put their bells face the other direction.
Yes, that's so true.
Maybe it's like a survival kind of instinct. You know, you make friends with people who have power over you.
Yes.
You make friends with people whose bells are in your ear.
Trumpet is what bothers me the most. That's the hardest one for me to sit in front of, which I think if we talk to our other inner voice colleagues in the second violin section, they'd say,
piccolo.
Just try sitting in front of a piccolo. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just painful to even think about. And there's this one principal trumpet of a regional I play with fairly often who's so nice about it. I mean, just so gracious. Like, we'll come over with and be like, do I need to lift your shield for you? I'm like, thanks. That's so nice.
I always used to ask for a shield. Always. But for your ears, that's good. You know, it blocks that initial hit. But it's still pretty loud.
It's still pretty loud,
yeah. Yes, it is. You still need the plug, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember playing the ring cycle and just putting it was like different levels of insertion.
Yes, I saw that too.
Of the earplug. It was like, okay, are we at the end of Guterdemerong? Okay, it's all the way in.
Did you mark it in the part like 2/5 of the way in now?
No, but it was like how far the pencil marking went in when I wrote EP was like, you knew. I was like, oh, I must have really meant it when I wrote that in.
Right. Yeah, or any of those opera rehearsals where you'd be in like in a large room and you'd have just the singers right behind you.
That was the worst. I never got to yell at anybody about this, and I still have this in me. I'm upset about it.
Yeah, get it out.
There was no reason the singers had to stand behind the violas to do this. They could have put them somewhere else. This was just clearly not considered.
You know what you could do? You could write it all down and then light it on fire and just let it off into the universe like an offering.
Today, we just took a walk and the wind chill was 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh,
So
no.
Wow.
if we could burn all of the grievances,
We keep ourselves
this
warm.
would be good.
That would keep you very warm.
Bonfire of the grievances.
Right. I like this. This is
Maybe next piece that.
right. I had a plan to write some music for narrator and a couple of violas.
Cool.
And so
Do it.
I thought it would be funny to have a narrator looking at the audience while we're playing, and every once in a while to say a Yiddish curse at the audience. But this would be better. It could just be grievance after grievance after grievance, sort of explaining why we're here just 2 violas now playing instead of having a whole orchestra around.
I love the way your mind works.
Yeah, me
Is this
too.
the way that a lot of your compositions start? Do you start with a melody? Do you start with an abstract idea like this that you're trying to emulate with music, or?
It depends. Sometimes, like, if there's an idea, it'll be that. Sometimes if you're being commissioned for something, the parameters are pretty clear. So that actually makes it faster. When anything is an option, that's when it takes me the longest to get started. Getting started is always the hardest, but if you really like the first 8 bars, then the rest of it will be good.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on the fence about the first 8 bars, you could still do something with it, but you may not love it at the end. There was that piece we put in Cincinnati. It's a piece by Dvorak, and I don't know if I'll be able to think of the name of it, but it's a theme in variations. And we were playing it, and backstage, Marna Street, one of the other violists, was saying to me, you're a composer. What don't I like about this? I think it's good, right? And I said, yeah, it's good. And I said, but the theme is just terrible. It's just the worst theme ever. He did the best he could with it, but it's what we were just talking about. I was thinking, this is why you want to really like those first 8 bars.
Well, especially if you're going to write a whole bunch of variations on them. Then you're stuck with the whole piece.
And so then at the concert or the dress rehearsal, I don't know, Marna brought the program with the notes in it. And she showed me, and it said in the program notes that one of Dvorak's friends bet him that he couldn't take this terrible theme.
Oh, hilarious.
It was a joke. He made it as bad as it could possibly be and write a piece based around on it. So, I mean, it was pretty, I'm not trying to brag how insightful I am about how bad this theme was. It was obviously bad music.
Right.
That he had to work with. But it still is being played by major orchestras now, so it couldn't have been that bad. I mean, what he did with it was very impressive. But the first 8 bars are, for me, always the hardest usually to get exactly to be right. And then it kind of all falls into place and gets faster and faster and more obvious. And the more pieces you write, the more obvious you see where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably like, practicing the viola. When you think back to youth orchestra, you put on 2 concerts a year or something, because it took so you didn't know anything. Now you show up and you know exactly what to do, and you can put together 3 concerts in 1 week, So I think writing a piece is very similar that way, that the first 20 pieces, you waste a lot of time.
Right.
You may still get there. It may be as good as what you write later. But later, you don't waste time. You see things faster. And
you don't get called in every 2 measures.
Oh, that's right.
Or every 2 minutes to, can you come try this?
That's one of the benefits, though, of you guys being together is that, quick turnaround and feedback.
But see, now I only call Tanya in once every 2 days, right?
Right.
So I've gotten better.
Much better.
Well, we're so excited just to have been introduced to you guys through email. It was so fun how this came about.
Yes, Violacentrics. There are 4 of us now.
Yes.
That's right.
Watch out, world.
I noticed some comparisons between how classical musicians were being brought up and how my religious friends were being brought up. They would pray every day and we would practice every day. They would go once a week to church and we would go once a week to quartet rehearsal or orchestra rehearsal. And so I started noticing, similar levels of dedication and how it would sort of take over your whole life. Didn't have a name for Cremonas back then.
Yeah, so for the people who are listening who have no idea what we're talking about, you have to give us a primer on Cremonas and who this being is and where do you learn more about him?
Oh, well, yes. Go to violacentrism.com. So the viola is a very complex instrument, and it could not have come about through evolution. There must have been a creator for the viola. Now, the viola was invented around 1500. We don't know exactly when. And we don't know who invented it. We do know, though, that it came from somewhere around Cremona, Italy. So along the lines of Athena being from Athens, we had to come up with a name. So we used Cremonus for the god of the viola. And obviously the viola is a much superior instrument to all other instruments.
Obviously.
There's some man-made imitations out there. I mean, a violin is, it's like
It's a little viola.
a little miniature viola that's easier to play. And, it's good for kids, younger kids. And then there's a cello for people who are, I guess they're too lazy to hold up cellos. They want to put it on the ground. I guess if you're old and tired. But obviously the viola is by far superior. And so this was a gift from a supernatural being to mankind. This is, and so I even wrote a whole opera about it. There's Violacentrism, the opera.
Just for two violas.
It's just for two violas, because opera is the Latin plural of opus, and it just means works. If you think of all pre-Wagnerian operas, there's really just an overture and then several works, several arias, one after the other. And then there's a finale that kind of wraps things up. So you don't actually need singers to have an opera. Of course, people think of singers now, and the viola is the closest instrument to the human voice. So you can hear the singing just in the viola playing. I mean, it is in there. I went out of my way deliberately to write that to sound like opera. I mean, it's not the normal style I write.
And it does. I went back and I listened to your premiere of the overture for Violacentrism, the opera. And it's really vocal in nature.
Yep.
Long lines, long melodies. And I loved how the two voices fit together. I thought it was lovely.
Oh, thank you. And it's also a little over dramatic in places, like opera can be. Now, and there's a whole story. When we did it, we had a music stand that faced the audience, and after the overture, there were 6 days. So the music stand would say day 1 facing the audience. So they had program notes so they could read what was happening during day 1. And then I'd flip it over to day 2 at a certain point. They could read what was happening. And then by the time you got to the absolute end, we finished the piece, and I flipped it over to day 7. On day 7, Cremonus rested, and that was the end of the opera. So the audience liked it. I think they liked it, hopefully for many reasons, but I think one is that it really was a concert. It's almost an hour long. The only difference is the lights were dim on stage as well, minus some stand lights, just to have the feeling of it being more of a pit. But it was a concert with a story that they could follow. So it was one extra layer to a normal.
It's cool. Well, you guys have so many pieces for Viola Duo. When we were asking you for recommendations, it was just because it was like, wow, there's just so much to choose from. It's kind of exciting to think that you could play concerts as a Viola Duo forever with Slapin-Solomon Duo stuff. So it's very cool. And I'm so excited to play the pieces that we selected for our next live stream.
Yeah, so we selected Prelude, which was one of your recommendations, and the Sonatina, which happens to come in the same Viola Duo collection.
Oh, you know better than I do at this point. All right.
Yeah.
They're both beautiful. They're really enjoyable to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
And I think what strikes me when I listen to the two of you is how just warm the blend is. It's clear that you're a violist writing for violists, which is exciting. And then when the two of you play together, it's just lovely. It's really lovely.
Oh, thank you.
So how did you two find each other? Can you tell us that story? How did you become a duo in more than one sense?
Newark Airport.
Oh, yeah, we met in Newark, New Jersey, which is where I was born, by the way. Don't look so impressed. Yeah, we met at Newark Airport at 6:10 a.m. on January 2nd, 1999.
Aww.
Nothing says romance like Newark Airport. That's.
And we were the viola section.
We were
the touring group.
We were the viola section of the Philadelphia Virtuosi. Tanya had been playing already in the Philadelphia Virtuosi. At the time, I was living in New Jersey, and I was playing in a quartet in North Jersey and New York. And the second violinist for this particular concert was Rudy Perot, and he played in the Philadelphia Virtuosi. And he said, one of our violists just left us. We've got this month-long tour that we're going to be doing of the West Coast. He said, what are you doing January? And I said, well, I don't know. And a friend of mine on January 1st called me up and he said, you want to come over and drink some beer? And he said, that sounds great. And he said, told him I was about to go to California to play all these concerts. And he said, "Oh, I've got relatives all over California. Bring your itinerary." And so I brought the itinerary along. He's looking at it, and he said, "You know you have to be in Newark Airport tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., right?" I said, "No, I thought it was 6 p.m." I had no idea. I found this out the night before. It was like 10 p.m. or something. I found this out. Without drinking beer, I would have missed all of this. So beer, in a way, is responsible for my marriage.
Thank you, beer.
Oh, I could say the same.
I bet a lot of people can say the same.
So, you know what I want to talk about? You guys are kind of like OGs in the world of virtual teaching.
All right. Anytime somebody uses an abbreviation at Facebook, I can go Google it. But what's OG? I can't do this live.
OG stands for Original Gangster.
Oh, yes. All right. We're too old for this. All right. And it's gangster with an R.
It's gangsta with an A at the end.
Yeah, with an A at the end. But I was going to say, I also might be too old to use that reference, but I don't care. I'm going to use it anyway. All my students that listen are going to roll their eyes.
I'm going to have to start using it now. Yeah. I collect these things. If I can find something that's really out of character, a way of saying something, I'll start using it just for entertainment. See how people react to it.
Yes. Keep it fresh.
But yeah, we've been teaching online for like over 10 years now.
Skype came fairly late to the United States, but I had a lot of friends in Germany and Switzerland and Austria, and Skype was already in use there for a long time. And I got it just to really practice speaking German because
they actually had little Skype phones.
Yeah, they had a Skype phone. Like the kind you used to have in a car. If you think of the old car phones, it was sort of like that.
Oh, like a device.
Yes. It was a device, yeah.
Oh,
how about that?
And I was at the point where I was starting to forget German entirely. It was clear to me it was going to go if I didn't do something. And I thought, well, I'll get this Skype phone and I'll talk to my friends and I'll, I won't forget it then. So I was very familiar with Skype. And then on the viola list online that Alan Lee created, that's been going since the 1990s, somebody said something like, "Oh, a friend of mine just had a voice lesson online." And I thought a light bulb went off in my mind. And I typed on the list, if anybody wants to try this tomorrow, or, I'll give you a free lesson if anybody wants to give it a shot. And we tried it and it worked. Over the years, you figure out a few ways to get around some of the limitations. I think probably this pandemic has forced everybody to try it out. We've been teaching for 10 years, but I think the vast majority of the public wouldn't consider it. Mm-hmm. They thought of it as something lesser. And I think it was our students, and we had students in Australia and England and Austria. And I think, again, these were people already very familiar with Skype, but Americans were less familiar with the whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
But now everybody's familiar with it. So I suspect going forward, certainly people are going to go back to some live lessons too, but I think a much higher percentage of the population will consider it even when this pandemic is over. I mean, and when I think of the amount of time we spent driving into New York City as a kid for lessons, and so much time could have been saved, and I could have taken lessons with so many people I admired, but it was impossible because they lived in another city in another country. So now it's not an issue at all. So I think it really is going to have a use going forward. It'll be a revelation to the public. You see, it was always there. It's like Cremona's. It's a revelation.
Yeah.
It just took a while for people to realize what was going on.
I totally agree. Coming from the other side of it, where I've been teaching for, I don't know, somewhere around 15 years. And up until March, I only taught in person. Mm-hmm. I think there was one year we had a blizzard here. And I said, all right, I'll FaceTime lessons because we had missed so much school and cancellations and stuff. When the pandemic hit and my students were going, I can't come to lessons. I was like, first of all, this is ridiculous.
Right.
I'm not sick. Get your butt over here, Then once I realized just how serious things were, I said, fine, we'll do this virtual thing for however long we need to. Couple months, whatever. Like, I don't know what I was thinking at the time.
Couple of weeks. It'll all blow over.
Yeah. 2 weeks, and then I will see you in April. Get ready.
Right.
But what was special about it for me was that it forced me to rethink some of the ways I teach. I relied so heavily on sound production in lessons.
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the room with somebody, that was the driving force of the way I taught, was like, okay, we need to make this sound the way it needs to sound. So let's do all those things. And virtually, of course, you still get some sound, but it's so much more visual.
Yeah.
And how do you become self-reliant and work on intonation without your teacher playing along with you? It's
right. I often would hold chords, but I can still do that. If it's only like a measure, I could still hit the chord and that'll work. But I would often play with them for quite a bit so they could adjust to what, and I can't do that online. So that's one thing to work around.
Yeah. And it's good. I mean, it's forced us to think outside of our own teaching boxes, which I appreciate. I like needing to learn new ways of doing things. I hope that never stops for the rest of my life. And I'll go back to a hybrid. I don't think I'll ever go back to fully in person again.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's right.
Your decision to start teaching more, this was something that just interested us so much when we met you guys, was that decision to sort of pivot from orchestral musician life.
How I grew up, my parents met playing in the Kansas City Philharmonic, which was the predecessor of the Kansas City Symphony in the early 60s. So they were both professional musicians. But by the time I came along, they had gotten out of it. And they were pretty, I don't know if bitter is the right word, but they didn't have too much good to say about it, at least as a business, as a way to make a living. They had some good things to say about it, but not as a way to make a living. And they always discouraged me from actually going into music at all.
That's so interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
My father wanted me to go into the insurance business because his family had an insurance. I could have been an insurance agent from New Jersey. So,
quite a different life path.
Yeah. So many of their friends had played in orchestras, and I heard similar stories from them. Not all negative, but a lot of negative. And my last viola teacher, Emmanuel Vardy, really didn't have anything good to say about playing in orchestras. And so I was not on a track. At the time, this was before Manhattan School of Music had its orchestral studies program. And it was sort of the end of the era where everybody was trained as a soloist. And not that that's what you were supposed to do, but that's just, so I had an orc rep class, but it was almost completely inapplicable to how you would take an audition. So I wasn't prepared for that at all. And I met Tanya, who had been in New World, and right after Philadelphia Virtuosi Tour, she had a gig lined up as principal on the Chattanooga Symphony and Opera. And we saw in the Union paper, there was an opening for the Knoxville Symphony, which was just a couple hours away, and we wanted to stay together. And I knew I didn't know what I was doing. Tanya said, "I'll show you how to do this." And I argued with her all. I said, I have to practice with a metronome? Really? I hate practicing with a metronome.
Crash course.
It was a crash course. And I was in New Jersey preparing. And I bought, at the time, the Bob Vernon CD of excerpts.
I know that CD.
I had it in my car.
Yep.
You know the CD?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
I had it in my car, and this was boot camp for me. I had to really learn what other people had been learning for years. I had to do this in a couple of months. And so my car got broken into because it was Elizabeth, New Jersey. This was before they had CD players built into the dashboard. I had a cassette player, and I had sort of this adapter. You put this cassette tape into the player.
Yes, and it had a cord. Yes.
I had that.
And so I had the Sony Walk on the seat. So I left the Bob Vernon CD in the player, and I came out, and my car window was broken open, and somebody had sewn a CD player. And I had this image of them. This was all in my mind, but I had this image of them driving in this sports car with tinted windows down the street, and like the windows slowly going down and the CD being tossed out. What is this?
You're like, joke's on you, bad guys.
I went to Knoxville. I was terrified. And after the first round, the personnel manager came out and sent me home. And I was packing up, and I talked to Tanya. This was my first cell phone. This was 1999. I was talking to Tanya. I said, no, it didn't. And he said, wait. He ran it. He said, he got it wrong. He sent the wrong people home. He sent the people home who advanced.
Oh, my God.
So that was good. And I won the audition. And then that was for the section. And then they had an audition for principal the next month, and I won that.
So we lived halfway in the middle.
We lived halfway in the middle.
And we each had a 1-hour commute.
Right.
I was just going to ask, how far is that?
Both of our transmissions died that year, so we figured we should get a gig together. And that's when we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's an excellent orchestra. They have an amazing hall. It's a 100-piece orchestra, but more than that when we went on tour. With Tanya got a gig. She won the audition for Louisville Orchestra. And then they had a 1 year that I went after that, and we stayed there. And then New Orleans, Louisiana Philharmonic in New Orleans had openings, and so we went and we won those, and we played in New Orleans, which is a fun city in your 20s. We were in New Orleans for 7.5 years or something. We were there when Katrina went through. That wasn't so fun, but we got to the point where it was time to do something else. From touring and everything else, each of us had been in 48 of the 50 states, and we decided, where do we really like? And it was the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts, where we live now. And so we came up here really with no contact. We just showed up and bought a house and started teaching. We thought, this is great.
Yeah, we really liked the area, and we thought it would just be great to actually move somewhere where we wanted to be instead of following the job.
It was us.
And you can do everything that you need to do music-wise up there remotely. Liz and I were talking about this just yesterday, about how the pandemic has and will change orchestral music versus any other kind of music that was being made. And Liz and I were trained to play in orchestras, and we just don't know what the future of that's going to be. So I think a lot of us are innovating right now. And it's wonderful that you guys have found a place that you're happy and you're still able to fulfill your musical goals and aspirations, what you want to do with music in the future.
Yeah, I wonder, right when I left Manhattan School of Music, they were starting their orchestral studies program. So what, until that point, had been very common in the Midwest, which is where Tanya went to school, in Oberlin and Northwestern. And she got excellent orchestral
training. I had
training.
Great orc rep classes with Lynn Ramsey.
So between Tanya and Bob Vernon's stolen CD, I got great advice on how to, but I didn't have that firsthand. I wonder if it's going to return more towards that because of what's happening in the orchestra world right now.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 90s, it might have been reasonable if you were running a conservatory to say, okay, we have to be training all the string players to how to go out and audition and do all of this stuff. But we're in the fog of war right now. We don't know what's going to come out at the other end. But it could be that the exception was the 80s and 90s, when orchestras were doing quite well. And that my parents were right when they were thinking back to the 60s and their experiences in the Kansas City Phil and their advice, don't do this for a living. They may have been right as a general rule. And what we maybe all saw was sort of a couple decades of an exception, at least in the U.S. My impression is in Germany and other countries maybe that has a longer history of orchestral music. There, it's more state supported, and so perhaps it'll fare better in the coming decades. But here, I think there's a bigger question mark hanging over.
Yeah. You can just look at the challenges from so many angles, right? Like a colleague of mine, and I told Stephanie this yesterday, a colleague of mine recently said, what other industry doesn't change its business model for over 100 years and expect it to continue to work, What does that look like going forward? We were talking yesterday about the necessity of innovation. I think it's easier to be innovative as small ensembles, like a duo who performs together on a regular basis, as you guys know.
Right.
The two of you can go down to your studio in the basement and record however many things you want to put on YouTube, right? You don't have to put this whole production together. And orchestras are expensive, rightfully so, but it's heartbreaking to think about not having the orchestra work. There's nothing like it. But I'm loving the opportunity to explore musical creativity with smaller formats. And I wonder, too, about this idea of orchestral training being the focus of a music performance degree when, how many musicians are we training to take these auditions versus how many jobs are actually available?
Exactly.
Some statistic I read, I think it was in Blair Tyndall's book, said every year on all orchestral instruments, there are over 11,000, I think it was, graduates, if you count all the U.S. conservatories and the larger university programs. And on all instruments, there were, I think it was 250 jobs. When you think back to the 1970s, people could easily distinguish the Chicago Symphony sound from, the brass, maybe from Philly with the string sound, and from these groups had much more individual character. But I think over time, there's been a uniformity in what I know. There are some differences, but I think a lot of audition committees, especially younger ones, are sort of looking for the same thing because everybody's being trained by the same CDs that get stolen,
Yeah.
So there's sort of this uniformity, and it's a very specific profile that they're looking for. which didn't come naturally to me. I mean, I always felt I was having to squeeze myself into a box to go play these auditions.
Same.
I think there are some people to whom this really does come naturally.
Mhm.
Their brain works that way and they're cut out for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to train everybody to do that one very specific thing doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and we go back and we want to listen to the old original recordings of, Tchaikovsky Concerto violin. We want to listen to these old David Oistrakh playing Shostakovich.
Absolutely.
And, you want to go back and listen to that. And when they were in their heyday, those musicians were trained to be individuals.
Yeah.
And those are the people who we look to as examples of true musicality.
I think the pendulum is swinging back, but you're right. We got to a point where it was everybody had to be the same.
Oh, this is blowing my mind right now. This is like I'm doing that emoji with the brain exploding out of the skull thing because I'm thinking about that even just in reference to Philly Orchestra because I went to Temple. And so I would say that the history of Philly Orchestra is rooted in my training. But what did we reference? We referenced the Orchestra Days of Normandy.
Right.
And so then you think about it from the perspective of old New York Phil recordings, whoever it might be that you enjoy listening to,
Mhm.
those musicians were all trained in that older school of individuality versus what's happening now and how, oh my gosh, gotta sit with that one.
I have a hypothesis that's maybe a little less controversial, or maybe not, than Mike Cremona's hypothesis. Let's go back to Paganini's time. Not only Paganini, everybody played many instruments and composed music and could improvise on the spot. In cadenza, that's what they did.
Mhm.
So Paganini played violin, viola, guitar, wrote all this music. He did all of these things. And that was very normal. What survives, like Kreutzer etudes and Rod and Gavinier, all teachers wrote their own etudes. It just happens that these particular sets survive and are used now. But there are many, many books of etudes from the time for their students because it was just something everybody was doing. Fast forward 100 years to the big sensation of the West, Jascha Heifetz. By this point, Heifetz did compose a very small amount under the name Jim Hoyle. He wrote love songs. They don't sound classical at all. They sound like something Frank Sinatra would say.
Ah, that's crazy.
I love this.
I'm going to have to find those.
Write it down.
He didn't write any classical compositions. He transcribed music. And by the way, just to go a little bit in between the two of those, the generation before was Fritz Kreisler.
Mm-hmm.
Fritz Kreisler, of course, did write a lot of music.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you get to Heifetz, he's transcribing. And again, it wasn't just Heifetz. This was normal. Ellman was transcribing. Many people from this era were transcribing. And by the time you get to the middle of the 20th century, people who were fairly young then, they're not transcribing either. And it's around this time that what back then was called the original instruments movement, but today is called HIP, Historically Important Performance, came into being. And I think one of the reasons for it is because people had questions. How do I play this piece of music? But since they were no longer composers, they couldn't look at this phrase and say, oh, well, this is the top note and there's a suspension here, so I'm going to make a crescendo here. And then, they couldn't look at it as composers, but they still had all these questions because there wasn't enough information on the page. And so they started looking to history instead of to music for answers.
Oh.
So they started supplying historical answers. And I think this could only happen in a time when people were not composers, when you had performers who were not writing any music. And so, like we were saying before, by the end of the 20th century, it just got ridiculous. You had 40,000 recordings of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. They sound incredibly like one another. It's all about just playing as absolutely in tune as possible, following whatever the latest thing the musicologists came out with about how it was supposed to be played. So there was really no room for individuality left. I think that plus the collapse of classical sales in the big record companies, they sort of just cut classical music loose because the percentage was getting so low that it caused the pendulum to come back a little bit. And so now I'm seeing more and more viola players writing music. When I was a kid, viola players didn't write music. I mean, there was Michael Kimber. I didn't know about him then. I knew a ton of viola players, and I didn't know a single one who wrote any music. But now it's becoming a common thing. And I think now that people are writing music again, you're hearing more and more individuality, and people are putting their own takes on it. Sure, individuality will take people over the top sometimes. But so what? Everything can be done to excess. And I think we were doing to excess this cookie cutter thing where everybody had to sound exactly a certain way.
Oh.
And it just wasn't interesting anymore. If you are going to make a 40,001st recording of the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, you should do something noticeably different with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is like, yeah, Stephanie and I were doing our full body nod. The phrase that comes to mind for me as we're talking about this is also, at least in pandemic time, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah.
So like here we are without somebody giving us that context, you know,
Right.
when you're an orchestral freelancer, your music director, your section leader, they're responsible for guiding you in your musical path, right? Your job is to match whatever it is that they're doing. It's not individual. And now I find myself leaning towards creativity that I never thought I had before. It's just the other day, I told Stephanie, we got a request from a friend and colleague of mine who's a violist who's been listening to the podcast. It was a really smart suggestion that our intro and outro music should have some viola in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a little backstory on why that happened that way is it was literally we ran out of time. We're like, wait, we need music? Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?
And we both like, you know, like chill electronic type vibes. So that's just what we defaulted to. So just for fun, the other day, I like put the track on in my headphones. I had my microphone hooked up and I just started like playing along with it on my viola. I didn't have anything written down. I was just like jamming. I'm sure my jazz colleagues from Temple will be like, Liz, don't say jam.
Well, I think the fact that you used air quotes right then was probably a giveaway.
That's true.
Yeah, he jams all the time to the Skype ringtone.
Oh, yeah.
To be determined what our new intro outro music will be.
Coming soon.
Yes, it definitely needs violas, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're aware.
Yes, everybody be patient with us. It's on our list. But the historically informed performance also is how we were brought up.
Yeah.
Right.
The text. Yeah. Right. Well, it's challenging to teach musicality, right? That's what we're really doing is to have enough information in your brain to make those choices yourself. And what that means is you have to know the way that a phrase works. Mm-hmm. You have to think of them as musical sentences. You have to be able to plan them out the same way that you would speak a sentence.
Right.
I think it's a very intuitive thing. It's just that kids and students don't realize that they have that capability. So it's teaching them how to be musical and then setting them loose on something. And it's small at first. And then it's bigger.
That's absolutely right. I talk about when they learn the notes and I say, okay, you've learned your lines. Now you have to learn how to deliver your lines.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's going to be like Ben Stein and Ferris Bueller.
Yes.
You have to deliver the lines in a way that's meaningful for the audience. And in order to do that, you have to understand what the words mean. I think it's fine if somebody wants to present a historically informed, especially in movies, if they're going to make a movie about something that happened in the 1700s, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The string quartet in the corner should be playing that way. And it's fine if that's the goal of a group.
Yeah.
But I don't think that should be everybody's goal. I think there are just a lot of things that the modern HIP movement sort of takes as historical that you could raise some questions around.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing wrong with it. There's a string quartet up here, the Wisteria String Quartet. They sound great. They recorded a CD of my string quartets. But even if they hadn't done that, I'd still say they sound great. I really like the other kinds. And they played this one Baroque tune, very HIP. And it was great because it separated it from the sound of the rest of the concert. Mm-hmm. You always want diversity, you want variety on a concert. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's not necessary. And there's something ahistorical about that because when you're sitting in the audience and you hear all of a sudden you've stepped back to this mystical time with less vibrato and less tension, less angst. And it's like these somehow, in the Baroque era, people must have been problem-free. But the original concert was not meant to sound like old music bringing you back to a previous time. The original concert, if it's Bach or whatever it is, was sounding like new music to the audience, not being played in an old style, being played in whatever the modern way was. So there's even something ahistorical about that, presenting it in such an old way, because the audience is experiencing something very different from what the audience originally would have. I just don't think, as a composer, if anybody in 200 years is playing my tunes, I really would hope they would not care what kind of strings I used or these small details, because it doesn't have anything to do with the music. I really like hearing people put their own spin on stuff that I've written. And there may be an original intent, but when people talk about the composer's intention, a lot of times they're not talking about intention, they're talking about expectation. It might have been Vivaldi's expectation that they were playing with less vibrato. That could be true. But an expectation is not an endorsement from the composer. It's not intention. It's not that he wanted them not to play with vibrato. It's just what happened to be around at the time. I always can hear different ways my tunes could go. Sometimes I hear somebody play it in a way I did not intend, and I think, well, that's as good as or better than what I had in my mind.
Yeah.
I think, again, because if you're writing music, you know it can go more than one way, and not every way can work. But even to take it to an extreme a little bit, if somebody plays something I wrote in a way that I don't like, but they believe in it, that must mean there will be other people in the audience who believe in that interpretation too. And so, I mean, it is their concert.
Yeah, it's their interpretation. What's the point of putting on a concert if you're just going to sound like the recorded version that you have at home?
Yeah, and as a composer, I can't fit it to the circumstances. What if they're playing that concert and somebody important just died, or we just went to war?
Yes.
They're going to take that information and change the interpretation of everything they're playing in some way.
Yes.
That the composer can't possibly know the current circumstances of the concert. I think people like the simplicity of this is the right answer, and so go play this way. And it's just so much more complex than that. There certainly is a place for HIP, especially the more actually historical versions of it,
Yeah. And I enjoy playing with an ensemble that, if we're playing Vivaldi, says we're really going to play historically informed and we're going to be as stylistic as possible. That's a really fun muscle to flex in itself.
Yeah.
But I love what you said about the fact that we are no longer musicians and composers at the same time. That is something that gets in our way, maybe.
Absolutely.
That's the other part too, is fostering for every individual musician that whatever the sound is that comes from them, and encouraging that in everybody, because every musician has something different to say,
Right.
What's coming up for you two? What are you working on now?
Well, we're trying not to get COVID, so we're staying home a lot. As to what we're going to do next, I don't know. But Patrick Neher, the composer who wrote us the double concerto, a friend of his was a violist in the Met Orchestra who died very early on in the pandemic of COVID. And he wrote a piece in his memory. I think he just sent us the music yesterday. So we're going to record some of those tracks in the basement. It's for string orchestra. So we're helping him out with that project. We have a lot of ideas, but it's hard to know exactly which one of them is going to pan out to be the next thing.
Yeah.
We've arranged.
We may try to put together a duo concert on, video.
Right.
We'll see.
We don't know how much longer this is going to go on for, but I think we're not going to get vaccines, I think, until the summer.
Yeah,
same.
Absolutely. It's a blend of kind of waiting to see what happens next and also finding ways to express your creativity and do different things. I'm sure you guys will have things that pop up here and there, even when we're all stuck at home. That's kind of the beauty of being able to do it virtually as well.
Yeah.
And how do rehearsals go when you're preparing things? Is there a lively debate? Are you just intuitively on the same page with everything? I mean,
well, I think we mostly are. Yeah, we mostly agree how things go. And when we don't, we'll yell at each other a little bit.
A little yelling going back and forth.
We have a sense of humor about it.
I love that. Once you weather a pandemic together, that's how you know.
That's right.
That's the test.
Yeah, it's a true test.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today, for doing the work that you've been doing for a long time in making a varied amount of repertoire available for viola, and being part of the efforts to mainstream the instrument in a way that hasn't been done before. It's really cool to know that you're there writing great music, and we can't wait to perform it. Really, truly, it's gonna be fun.
Thank you very much. This
thanks.
This was great.
This was really fun.
We really enjoyed it. We enjoyed hearing your previous podcasts.
Right. We look forward to the live stream.
That'd be fun to write a jingle.
Oh, hey, no pressure though, seriously. But if inspiration strikes, we would not be upset about that.
All right. You need viola music, but maybe you need viola music by a violist.
By not just another violist, but a fellow violacentric.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
To bring it full circle, the OG Violacentrics.
There we go.
I love it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Violacentric podcast. If you enjoy what you're hearing and would like to support us, please consider a contribution through the PayPal or Venmo links in our episode notes. Once again, I'm Liz O'Hara Starr.
And I'm Stephanie Knutson. We release new episodes every other Monday, so please subscribe so you don't miss one. In the meantime, connect with us on Facebook and on Instagram and email us at violacentric@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening.